Live. Okay, so hi everyone. Gail Hanlon here from Everything Homeschooling and Alternative Learning. I do have, I've been homeschooling and alternative learning for 30 years. I have 5 daughters and 1 son. And I'm hoping that you're able to join us both now and also in the replay. I'm just making sure that I'm actually going live on the two simulcasting to YouTube and Facebook. So it should be up. And usually if I can get past the first minute and it doesn't crash, we're good. Okay. So I wanted to do this series on homeschooling and alternative education because this situation that we're all in right now and we have been in for the last 6 months is a crucial time for parents. And it's a time when we've had this upheaval and we have had more time with our kids than we ever have before, especially if you weren't homeschooling or alternative learning before. And there are some definitions that I want to go through. If you're watching this on the replay, please comment. If you would like to join me as a guest on the show, I'm putting up the link right there right now. And Facebook is telling me there's an error while loading, which I don't understand exactly, but let's see. Let's see if it'll go back. Sorry for that delay. But if you want to be a guest on the show, please follow that link if you can see it. We should be live on YouTube as well. I'm just going to check my YouTube channel. There we are on live on YouTube at least. And now to confirm the live on Facebook, just going to go to my messages here, see if we can. Yes, we are live on Facebook as well. Love to make sure I've confirmed that. I'm going to turn this volume down so that I don't get an echo. All right, wonderful. Thank you for joining me. And if you have any questions, please put them into the comments. I am delighted to try to help you find the answers that you need that work for you and your family, because ultimately that is what the situation is. And a lot of people might tell you that different things. Don't believe everything you hear. Always check it up. Always ask for background and backup resources. I want to share with you some of the resources that I've had over the last 30 years of homeschooling my children. So the first person I met who introduced me to the concept of homeschooling as a thing was Wendy Priesnitz. She is a phenomenal lady, and she has a magazine called Life Learning Magazine, and she's just amazing. So this is one of her books. It is called School Free, the Homeschooling Handbook. And there's how you spell her name, Wendy Priesnitz. Hopefully it's not backwards. and another one of her books, which I highly, highly, highly recommend, especially now when we have so many questions, is Challenging Assumptions in Education. Challenging Assumptions in Education addresses all those things, all those questions, all those insecurities that we have about our capability of teaching our children. You do have it in you. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't. And this is the 4th episode of this that I've been doing, and we started tackling some questions. And the first question we went through in the first show was, why do families homeschool? Well, we've got a number of different reasons now, but and what the today we want to just talk about the difference that's coming up in a lot of the homeschooling groups is the difference between people are schooling at home using the curriculum from the education ministry, or people who are homeschooling and choosing their own curriculum. So now we have this, those people who are still registered and in the system, and those people that have chosen to excuse themselves and their children from the system and are doing something completely different. Parents, I think a lot of parents didn't know that they have that right to choose. And I've gone over that in some of the other shows. And so you can either scroll back and watch some of those, or you can text me or call me. My phone number's up on that annoying little rolling scroll at the bottom of the screen, and I'm happy to help talk to you individually. I'm also set up a Zoom chat for after this session, so that people who want to continue to talk and to continue to ask questions, we probably have a lot of the same questions. So we want to make sure that everybody gets a chance to find the answers for themselves. So that question of whether you are in the system or out of the system, I want to clarify the Education Act in Ontario, because it is consistently misquoted and used to intimidate and make people feel like they can't do this, that they have to do something. So wherever you might hear somebody say you're required to register with the schools or send a letter of intent, that is not the case. Now, somebody on Facebook just asked me to prove, where does it say that you don't have to send a letter of intent? And generally speaking, governments and ministries and boards of education, they are not going to make a list of the things you don't have to do. They're going to tell you the things that you have to do. And the only things that you have to do as a parent with regards to your school-age children is to be responsible for your school-age children. In the Section 21(2)(a) of the Education Act, and I can pull up a picture of that in a minute. It states, it used to say a child. So the only change in the Education Act that has happened in this particular part of the Education Act in the last 30 years has been they have changed it from child to person. So it used to say a child is, now it says a person is. That's a really important word. I want you to hold on to that word. A person is excused from attendance at school, providing satisfactory instruction is received at home or elsewhere. So first of all, the part of the Education Act that is misquoted consistently all over the internet, all over the groups, all over everywhere, is that they replace that word is with the word may be. So then it's in printed form all over the internet. A child or a student or a person may be excused. There is no may be. A child is excused. And who excuses a child? The school doesn't, the ministry doesn't, the boards don't, the principal doesn't, the parents. The parents are the only ones you are the one that decides whether your child is excused from attendance at school or not. Okay, there is no requirement to register a letter of intent or to send a letter to the school. However, as a form of courtesy, if you are removing your child from the school, if you are choosing a different curriculum than the school ministry curriculum, and you want to do things differently, then it may be courtesy to send a letter stating, and I would use this terminology because there's so many terms that are misunderstood and that make people fearful. If you say homeschooling, unschooling, deschooling, world schooling, all those terms that the general school realm do not understand, and a lot of us have had to learn what they mean. The terminology I would recommend is that you are choosing a private alternative for your child's education. If you say that you are choosing a private alternative, they do not have the right to ask you what that alternative is, although they might. But that is all you need to do or say that shows that you have excused your child from attendance at school. So that being said, because I have to say that every show, because there are new people watching all the time, and that is probably the most misunderstood part. Now, people are going to say, what about PM 131, Policy Memorandum 131? Think about those two words, policy, memorandum. It's a memo. The policy 131 states that a parent should notify the school. And that's where we get that we have to send a letter terminology from, because it is specifically worded to make parents feel that this is a requirement, that this school authority is telling you that you have to do this. But the terminology in the actual policy, you can go to ontariohomeschool.org to see the wording of the policy, and you can also just look up Policy Memorandum 131 and look it up for yourself. Always verify and fact check what you're doing. And so that policy is simply a request for families from the boards to let them know that they're homeschooling or choosing a private alternative. And I want to give you a little bit of history about how that came about before I have a wonderful guest come on and talk to us about the fantastic programs that he's doing and has been doing. So the history of Policy Memorandum 131. What made them decide to create this policy? Well, many years ago, the school boards were taking families to court because they didn't agree with whatever curriculum or instruction they were doing. And that part of this Education Act, Section 21(2)(a), that says a child is, or a person is excused from attendance at school, providing satisfactory instruction is received at home or elsewhere. Satisfactory instruction, and this is one of those things that I say every show, satisfactory instruction is not defined by the Education Act. What might be satisfactory for a Hasidic Jewish family might not be for an Amish family, might not be for a Muslim family, might not be for a family who has an autistic child or a brain injured child. Those satisfactory instruction is different for every child. There is not a one way fits all. It's not one size fits all. So satisfactory instruction is totally open to the parents' interpretation of what that means for them and what works for them. So what was happening when the school boards were taking the families to court is that they had the burden of proof to prove that the families weren't providing satisfactory instruction. The parents were under no obligation to prove that they were providing satisfactory instruction. So when the school boards lost cases, every single case that was brought to trial, they lost. This cost the Ministry of Education a ton of money in legal charges and legal fees. So that was what the situation, they were told by the ministry, stop taking families to court. You have to stop. But they still wanted the information about who's homeschooling and where are they, so that they could still feel like they had the responsibility over them. So that began or resulted in Policy Memorandum 131. So the ministry and the school board's answer to no, you can't take families to court anymore because you keep losing and costing us so much money is, let's tell them they have to send a letter, even though they really don't. So that's a little history lesson. You feel free to look that up anywhere on the web. Good luck. I don't know if it's recorded anywhere. Maybe I should do that. But that's a huge misconception. And put into perspective, yes, it is courteous to let them know if you are taking your children out. If your children have never been in the system before, you don't have to send a letter to anybody, anywhere, anytime about what you're doing with your child. But the fear is that because you're not required to do that or to be under somebody else's purview, is that you're going to be doing wrong things. You're going to be hurting your child. So the fear is that you're not capable of doing this, which leads into our second question. Are parents qualified to teach their own children? So I am going to bring on my wonderful guest, because this is an area of expertise of his that is, I am so blessed to have him with us today. And I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. I'm going to introduce him now and bring him up on the screen. This is Charles R. Solis Jr. He has 45 years of experience in the field of child brain development and is the co-founder with his wife and colleague. Now, I don't know how to pronounce her first name. How do you pronounce her first name? Oh, hang on. How do you pronounce her first name? No,
not very easily.
So what do we call her?
Her name is Conceição, which is Portuguese / Brazilian. You've got some Brazilian history behind you,
I
Gail,
do.
right?
I was there from the time I was 4 till the time I was 7. Not too long, but my whole family is down there and in Argentina and Buenos Aires. And my brother lives in São Paulo right now. And my nephew is in Rio de Janeiro. I lived in Rio de Janeiro, right on Copacabana Bay. With an apartment right on Avenida Atlantica, right there facing the ocean. Yeah.
How nice.
It was lovely. So anyway, with your lovely wife and you are the executive director of the Reach Family Institute, an educational organization specializing in children with special needs, and Brain Fit Kids, an educational organization teaching parents how to parent with the brain in mind. So I'd like you to tell us all more about what you do with children, because it's fascinating, and parents.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Gail. This is a real joy. Boy, what do we do? Really, in a nutshell, what we do is we empower parents to be able to take on the responsibility and the great joy of raising, developing, and educating their children. And that is the case whether the child, regardless of the child's level of functional ability. So you mentioned about the work of Reach as well as Brain Fit Kids. And so essentially, we work with children who span the entire spectrum of functional ability. So what I mean by that is sometimes, doesn't happen real often, thank God, but sometimes we are asked to work with children who are comatose, kids who have no ability whatsoever. And in most of those cases, children that the medical world has written off. Okay. So that's on the low end of the spectrum. On the high end of the spectrum, we work with children who function very well, and we work with everything in between. So when we're helping families, helping children, we do so with no focus whatsoever on a diagnosis in the case of kids who've got difficulties, but rather focusing on the children where they are. Our only interest is in discovering what are the abilities that a child has. And then once we know that, what can we do to either create ability where it doesn't exist or improve ability where it does exist. And we do that by empowering the parents. So we actually, for example, in the case of kids who've got developmental challenges, we're not doing therapy on them. So if we've got a kid who's in a coma, we're teaching the parents how to get that kid out of a coma. Earlier, we were talking earlier, and you mentioned that, a big issue that you deal with is trying to get parents to realize that you can do this. You actually do have the ability to do these things. And boy, that lack of confidence is nowhere more apparent than in the case of parents who've got kids with big developmental challenges. Because of course the world, the education world, the rehab world, the medical world, essentially tells them that only trained professionals are capable of dealing with this, even though they have failed miserably with their kid.
Yeah,
it's still the purvey of trained professionals, and so of course parents who by instinct want to be involved in their child's life. I mean, that's the case no matter what it is. Like a kid's got a cold, you want to try and make them feel better. Kids having problems with learning geography, you sit down at night and try and help them. So it's part of it's kind of an inborn part of being a parent that you want to be helpful, except when it comes to kids with developmental challenges. And then that natural instinct is literally crushed by the professional community. And so a situation that already is bad ends up even worse as the parents, perhaps for the first time in their lives, feel completely helpless. And there's really, there's nothing more devastating than having no hope and the belief that there's nothing you can possibly do about it. Mm-hmm. And so our job when we're dealing with, kids who've got special needs is to basically turn that on its head, and show parents that not only can you help, but there's nobody who is better qualified to help than you.
Yeah.
And then, the work with well children who function fine, really is more geared towards um, of this unbelievable gift that their baby has been born with, the human brain, which allows everything to be possible. And to get them to see how critical their role is in bringing that about. Parents, and this is part of the problem with our professional community, is that they have essentially stolen all of that away from parents.
Yeah.
And so parents, essentially today, most parents have the idea that their job is to feed and breed. And everything else is left to the professionals. And that's incredibly, incredibly unfortunate, because the reality is, as you well know, Gail, the reality is that there is nobody who will ever be a more influential teacher for each child than his mom and dad.
Yeah.
And that's true for good and for bad. Because obviously there are some parents who are dysfunctional and therefore can create problems for their children. Kids who are abused, kids who are neglected, etc. But the reality is that one way or the other, nobody will ever have a bigger influence on a child than mom and dad.
That's right.
So that being the case, we feel an incredible responsibility to try and get every parent in the world to understand that, because to the extent that we can do that, we can change the world.
I have to interject here. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on here with me, because I'm so grateful that I met you way back in, was it 1996 or 1997? I think both years. You were at both conferences, right?
Actually, it would have been it was in 97.
97.
And then maybe the next year, I can't remember.
Yeah. But we sat together at dinner and we had this great conversation. You blew my mind, literally wide open. You confirmed everything my grandfather ever tried to, the way he lived, because my grandfather was a scientist and he never got past a grade 6 level education in England, but he got an honorary degree from Harvard.
Wow, and that's awesome.
The way he lived his life, every breathing, waking moment of everything he did was, if you don't find what you want, make it. So in everything in my upbringing was possibility and ability. And when you started talking about looking at children from what they can do and not what they can't do, that is totally opposite from our system.
Absolutely.
Tests and assesses kids. Let's find out what they don't know and then barrage them and force them to try and get the concepts and the things that they don't understand.
Totally, yes.
And then they don't finish it. So if you do a test at school that is, 15 questions, you get 7 of them right and you pass, but they never go back and help you get the bit that you missed.
Right.
So you're going forward with incomplete information.
Exactly.
So we're not setting our kids up to succeed when we don't start the way you do, with the abilities and not looking at the disabilities. That has been probably one of the most pivotal concept that has, just made the pathway for my life in dealing with my children who, I was so blessed. I cannot thank you enough, because literally you blew my mind wide open, and you let all those possibilities in for me to think the way I could think. So you really helped my brain. You are
Well,
now.
that's wonderful. I greatly appreciate that. Yeah, we kind of pride ourselves in doing that. Most of the parents who come to us, when they come, are scared. They are they lack confidence. Most of them are pretty beaten up by the system by the time they.
Especially, yeah, especially if they have um, kids with challenges, because
Exactly.
they're tired, they're
Yeah.
exhausted,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Exactly.
they're just working themselves to death. And the gift that you give families is that you can take that time. You need to relax. You need to look at things from a different perspective, and then you can breathe. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah.
You
Well,
allow.
and then what happens is, and we've seen this, like as you said, I've been doing this for 45 years. I started young, but what tends to happen with most parents is that, once they start to see results in their kids, for the very first time, it's amazing to see how the parents transform.
Yes.
Um, we've got a mom. I'll tell you a quick story. We have a mom of a kid in a tiny town in South Dakota, a little girl who was born with a condition called hydranencephaly, which means that she was born missing most of her brain. We saw her she was the first baby of a very young couple. Mother was, I think, 21, maybe 22, and dad a couple years older. And basically, the doctors said, forget about her, have another child. And when we saw her for the first time, she was blind. She was immobile, very sick, seizures. A kid in rough shape, and missing most of her brain.
Mm-hmm.
Today, that little girl can see, which, don't ask me to explain how she can see, because according to our understanding of brain anatomy, it shouldn't be possible, because she doesn't have a visual cortex.
Wow.
All I can tell you is that because of the miracle of brain plasticity, and us knowing how to take advantage of that,
Yep.
this little girl can see today. She goes to school, and her mother transformed from kind of a meek mouse to a lioness,
Yes.
and she is just extraordinary, and that's par for the course. That happens to most of our parents. We
You have
create
so many.
we create revolutionaries.
Right. You have so many of those stories. I remember you talking about kids with mobility, like no mobility, they were immobile.
Right.
Kids with all sorts of every kind of challenge, that with the loving, and like you said, no better person than the parent who is filled with love and emotionally connected and invested in their child's happiness and growth and intelligence and future. There is no better teacher or person to help that child. So yes, I still tell people about you all the time, and I just am so grateful. And I know that the families that watch this in the replay or that are watching now will appreciate that, because it's. I don't want to minimize healthy kids that don't have the challenges. All have challenges. They're just
Of
different.
course. Oh, of course. Of course.
I
Yeah.
I was working with a little girl this morning, and her mom tends to be so exhausted and tired that she just gives in to the whining, right?
Uh-huh.
And I said, you know what, when she starts whining, that affects you and it tires you out. So you need to say, you know what, when you're done with that attitude or that whining, I'll be there for you when you need me. And so what I said was, you know, here's something for you to do. So she started doing it. She got frustrated with it. And she went over to her mom and said, Mom, would you help me? And she was whining. And then I said, well, define help. What does that look like? What do you want her to do? How do you want her to help you? And after about 10 times of paraphrasing and change, just helping her understand what that meant and how to describe it, it came down to wanting her mom to do it for her because that's easier, right? So
Sure.
if a child can get you to do it for them, then they don't have to do it and they don't have to worry about it. But observing her, understanding that, and helping that child organize, go from frustrated anxiety to teaching her how to organize her thoughts, organize what she was doing, do one thing at a time, do it repetitively from what she could do. You know, you are capable of doing this. You know, a lot of families don't take that time until COVID to actually maybe get to know their children and how they learn. Because when I have to tell you how I understand my observation. So teachers observe kids in the system or who are in their care or that they're responsible for helping, tutor, learn, whatever. They assess them by observing them and by comparing them to what they're expected to do, and that. When I work with a child, I go back to anthropology, really. I spend time with a family and a child, and I actually took this from Birute Galdikas, who worked with the orangutans with the Leakey Foundation.
Okay. Yeah.
And he had this journal of her watching the orangutans and writing down everything that she could possibly do, everything that they did to get to know them, what their temperament was, what the outcome was of what they were doing, whether they tried to do something differently. And so I've done the same thing with children. Observe them. How are they planning things out? What is it about this game that you like? What is it about what are you doing with those blocks? Why, it's like watching a 2-year-old put cars one after the other. Well, there's this sense of order. And you can tell a lot by something that simple about how a child thinks.
Yeah. Now you hit on some phenomenal points there, Gail. So one of the first things that you said that struck me, you used the word organization, organized, etc., several times. I mean, that's the key. That's the key to brain development. Mm-hmm. Okay. As the brain develops, as it follows the natural progression of development, provided that we don't interfere with it.
Yeah.
And that's a big proviso.
Huge.
Because in today's culture, parents do all kinds of things to interfere with the natural process of brain development. And that's a big part of why we have an epidemic today of children in schools with learning disabilities, with behavior issues, with anxiety, all kinds of issues. Get back to the parental interference in the natural process of brain development. But really the end game of that process is organization. Mm-hmm. So the more organized the brain is, the better it functions.
Right.
And that plays out in many, many ways. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
I think one of the things that comes to mind when you were talking about that is parents don't maliciously interfere with
Oh
their
no, of
children.
course not. Of course not. No,
They
it's the
don't
culture that tells them
know.
to do this.
Yeah, they have been conditioned to think that they don't have what it takes to help their children, so they try to do what they're told to do, or they follow a curriculum, a boxed curriculum or the school board curriculum that teaches them that they have to do what somebody else expects. Whereas when you turn this around and you look at your child for what they can do, yes, there are always going to be expectations, but most of those are naturally occurring. So I explain it to families like, cooking. If you add salt instead of sugar, you're not going to get the right result, right? So you're going to learn by trial and error. And so it's not that you tell a child you have to put sugar in. Well, you should put sugar in because that's the recipe, and they'll find out why if they don't.
Right.
But the parents wanting, feeling obliged or forced to meet somebody else's expectations.
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
And that fear comes from people who think that if you are not compelled or coerced, or if you are not required to have oversight or be checked on by some authority, that you are going to mess up your kids.
Correct.
And that's just fear, propagation of fear, and it's not conducive to learning.
That's right.
Healthy.
Another thing that I want to point out, because it's also an excellent point, is your focus on anthropology. Okay, we've done the same thing for 45 years. A big part of the way that I have looked at children is through an anthropological lens.
Yeah.
So, for example, the idea of children being grouped together by the same age in classrooms is so antithetical to the natural way in which human beings actually developed and evolved. It's virtually the opposite of what happens in primitive cultures even today, and what happened throughout our anthropological history. Sleeping, the way in which parents sleep with their babies or not, is also part of that. A very good friend of ours is a guy named Dr. Jim McKenna, who was for many years the head of the anthropology department at the University of Notre Dame. He was one of my daughter's mentors when she studied there and got her degree in anthropology. And McKenna is the world's leading expert on breastfeeding and sleep. To the dismay of the American Medical Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics, McKenna has all of the data to show that babies that co-sleep, and that can find in different ways, doesn't have to necessarily mean in the same bed, but in very close proximity, babies who sleep like that are, by any way you can possibly measure it, heart rate, breathing rate, oxygen rate, doesn't matter. You can measure anything. McKenna has done it. McKenna has the 2 laboratories in the world that studies infant sleep scientifically. Okay. Putting politics and everything else aside, and just looks at what happens with babies when they sleep close to mommy and when they sleep far away. And the data is solid. It can't be argued. And boy, that's anthropology to the nth degree.
That's right.
And what it says is that what it said, what all of it says is that, if we give kids what the good Lord or nature, depending on what your proclivity is, intended, they thrive. They do beautifully.
Yes.
And if we mess around with that, then we run into trouble.
Yeah. I had a conversation.
I love that.
Yeah, conversation with a lady on Facebook. She was saying that, if anybody can teach their child, why are we paying teachers so much? I'm not going to go into that part of it, but she said, they must have a certain level of education or a teacher's degree or a certificate or something to do that. And she called them, or we can't just let any moron teach their child. And my first question was, why would you call them morons? And in my back of my head, I'm thinking, do you think of yourself as a moron? I don't know. I don't want to be rude, right?
That's the first question I thought of.
Yeah. So then through our little conversation, she felt that she was a moron when it came to helping her child learn, to teaching her child, because she never had a good time at school, because her experience at school, she always felt stupid. She always felt insecure and not good enough. And it was never up to snuff. Right. So she was always that I can't do this. But this woman is a paralegal. She owns a bookstore. She's highly educated. She went to university and did everything right. She's perfectly capable of running a business and having access to all these books. And she's a paralegal. But she feels like a moron when it comes to teaching her children. It's that how we can try to help families and parents regain their confidence and wash away all those insecurities and get back to what you can do, not what you're being told you can't do or what you have to do.
So important.
Yeah.
So important.
Oh, thank you so much. I am gonna, you're welcome to stick around. I'm gonna just go through a couple more books with some people that may be looking for that. And so I thank you so much for this. And I'm gonna send you the link and everything. If anybody wants to reach Charles, where should they reach you? How can they get in touch?
Okay, so there are two websites.
Okay.
One is www.reach, REACH, familyinstitute.org, O-R-G. And the other is www.brainfitkids.com.
All right.
And on both of those websites, so reachfamilyinstitute.org, that's good. And then brainfitkids.com. And so there's contact information on both of the websites with tons of great information, child brain development, behavior, physical development, all kinds of stuff.
And you do you do lives every week too, right?
We've
oh, okay.
Right now we're on a bit of a hiatus with that.
Okay.
But we'll be picking that up in September.
Right.
And we're right now we're working on a new project to create a mentoring program for families with well children, young children, and also another mentoring project for families with kids with special needs.
Oh, fantastic!
So we'll be working on that over this month, and I'll send you some details about that once we have it ready to launch.
Yay! Okay, thank you so much, Charles. We'll talk to you later.
Okay, it's been wonderful, Gail. Stay in touch.
Will do. Bye.
All the best. Bye-bye.
All right. So I can't thank Charles Solis again enough for being here with us. We still have about 10 minutes to go. And I wanted to share some of my library with you. So don't forget, you can reach him at reachfamilyinstitute.org, and we will put the other BrainFit Kids link in the comments. And if you do have questions or anything, please put them in the comments. I do answer every question, and if I can give you some direction to where to find the answer and help empower you, I will do whatever I can. And I've also put my cell phone and my email address in the comments so that you can contact me at any time. Happy to help. Okay, so since I've been doing this for not nearly as long as Charles, but 30 years and 23, 24 years in actual functioning, doing it on purpose. So I have acquired a really awesome library, and I'm looking at putting it up somewhere. But I want to show you some of the books that are huge in this learning about learning how to learn. I often tell people my goal for my children was not to teach them stuff, but to teach them how to learn. So if you're a parent and you're out there saying, I'm not qualified to do this, well, nobody's infinitely qualified, but you are the best qualified person. Even if you don't know, or you feel like you don't know anything, even if you think you're a moron, you're not. Here's what you do. If your child, or when your child comes to you with a question and you don't know the answer, this is a wonderful opportunity for you. Here's what you say. I don't know. Let's go find out. And you help your child learn by teaching them how to learn. That way, when something like COVID or some big, if a change in a job or any change in their life comes up, you've taught them how to react and adapt to whatever that is instead of be paralyzed. Because so many kids say, oh, if I can't do this, oh, I've tried to do it, I can't do it, I give up, I don't bother. That defeatist attitude frustrates a lot of people, a lot of parents, and you hopefully, have the opportunity to say, well, let's find out, let's figure it out. And even with the abundance of information that we have on YouTube, all over the internet for finding out how to do things, there are a lot of kids that will still just ask a family member or look at a book. Huge upticks in sales of the encyclopedias, because people are trying to get off the screens and into books. So if you go to a used bookstore or Goodwill or something like that, and you don't pick up, you'd be lucky to find an encyclopedia right now, because they're flying off the shelves. So that being said, the parents that can shift that and adapt and teach their children to learn how to learn is huge. So one of the first books and authors that people talk about is Rudolf Flesch. And this book is Why Johnny Can't Read and What You Can Do About It. That is a classic in educating yourself about alternative education and just learning how learning happens. And talking about that, John Holt has his books, How Children Learn. My other favorite is Learning All the Time, also by John Holt. And he also has a book called Learning How Children Fail. So I would highly advise you to look for those online. Used copies are great. It's always, I like having the books themselves because it's tangible. But when you're looking for books, John Holt is amazing. And the John Holt website, I'm going to bring that up for you. It's GWS. John Holt, GWS.com. Now, he did the magazine for 30 years from 1977. Started in more than 30 years. Started a lot longer than 30 years. Started in 1977, Growing Without Schooling. That's what GWS stands for there. And I'm going to share this screen so that you can see it. And again, if you have any questions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments. Let's see if we can get this up in the screen. Just waiting for it to click in. All right, I'm going to show this in the screen here. And I'm always happy to help families with resources, and this is one of the great ones. If you have the opportunity to get some of the volumes, the collaborated volumes of this magazine, that's amazing, because all the questions and situations that you could ever imagine, they have gone, that other people, other families have had. You are not alone. You are not in this on your own. You're not the first person challenged with this. And so I want to encourage and empower you to, take a breath. If you hear the words required or that you must do something, just take a double check on that. So helping children learn and explore in the world is seen as a branch of natural science, like trying to raise exotic plants or little-known animals. So there is so much here. You can get the print version or the digital media for Growing Without Schooling. So many great books and resources. I particularly want to draw your attention to the YouTube channel for Growing Without Schooling. Can't say enough about that because it's fantastic. Okay, now, next week, we're going to talk about how homeschooled kids, or how children who have learned in a different way other than going to school get into college and university. So that will be our topic for next week. If you get a chance to find this book online, Real Lives, 11 Teenagers Who Don't Go to School by Grace Llewellyn, it is excellent. It's their stories about how they did what people think you can't do. Well, what about higher education? How do you get into college if you don't have a high school diploma, if you don't have any credits? How do you get into university? Somebody thought that was a great book title. And what about college? And this is by Kathy Cohen. So highly advise that one. But also, I did just also find a friend of mine who my daughter played with in our homeschooling group years ago. Okay, I'm just going to see if I can get this page up, because my good friend Marion Buchanan in London, Ontario, has got a fabulous page that I'm going to find here. Let me find it, and then I'll bring it up on the screen. And of course, okay, I'm going to put that link in the comments because we're already past time now, but a fabulous resource. Please make sure you check it out. Sorry, I didn't have it prepared, but next week we're going to go into it a lot, how to get into college and university if you've never been to school. And I look forward to seeing all of you. And thank you so much for staying with me. And thank you, Charles, my wonderful guest. Take care and have a great evening and any other time. Bye for now.